Greetings, Guzzlers. Beer night tonight. And welcome to Egypt. Specifically 13th century Egypt. Tonight we're dining medieval again, but medieval Egyptian style. And certainly the ancient Egyptians brewed beer. Put that, I'm going to fall over and lose my beer then. Anyway, we're going to make Tabahaja, beef with pistachios, because we're splashing out tonight. We've got pistachios. That's a luxury item, as you'll find out. Now, earlier this evening, I put about a kilo of diced beef, braising steak or whatever, it's up to you, in this pan, covered it with water, and it's been simmering away there for a couple of hours. And in a minute, we're going to remove the meat and we're going to keep the broth. Now, I've been de-scumming. Been a bit de-scumming diet tonight. Anyway, it's de-scummed, so I'm not doing any more de-scumming. So, let's start getting this dish together. Now, before I get the beef out, what I'm going to get going is some bit of prep. All right. So in there, I've got about 1/4 teaspoon, or just over 1/4 teaspoon saffron. No expense spared. And I'm just going to add from this fancy future device a little bit of boiling water, and we're just going to then set that to one side to infuse the water with a lovely golden colour. Now, obviously, because it's beef with pistachios, I've got here just over 1/2 cup. Couldn't be bothered to work it out. It's about 1/2 cup of pistachios. Now, like I said, we're being extravagant. I haven't had a drink really yet. I can't speak properly. Probably that's a problem. Now, pistachios today are quite a luxury item, aren't they? But even back in 13th century, they were a luxury item. So they were chucked in to impress your guests. And it's like, oh, we've got pistachios. Oh, ain't he posh? So it wasn't really a crucial part of the dish. It was simply a way of showing off. So, got pistachios, and what we're going to need to do with them is lightly crush them. Now, I could just put them as they are in the pestle and water and hammer them, and they fly everywhere. So I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to put them in a bag, and I'm going to lightly crush them that way. You're going to want some honey, fresh mint, corn flour, sesame oil, and then this stuff. This stuff, Atarif Tib. I'll tell you about that in a minute. And we're going to eat it with some authentic ancient Egyptian bread. Different video. Right. So, for the second time, let's start prepping the beef. So, gradually fishing this beef out. Okay, and like I say, we want to keep the broth that it's cooked in, because we're going to add that back later. Okay, this has been cooking, like I say, for about 2 hours. And actually that was quite common practice. It was probably a way of cleaning the meat, because you don't know how fresh it was necessarily, and also as well as it enhancing the flavour, this sort of double cooking. I think I've just about got it all out. So I'm just going to put this bowl, which I've cleanly picked a metal bowl, and it's going oh, there's a bit. Bought this Chinese ship thing. Never used it yet. So there you go. Right, so like I say, we're going to keep that. I'm just going to put that lovely nice beef off there. Look at that. Keep that to one side. Put that to one side. And then all I'm going to do, I'll put me nuts in a bag, and I'm now going to get crushing me nuts. Well, not too much, just a bit of crushing, lightly crushing me nuts. So where did this recipe come from? Well, actually, this was a recipe that was written down. Again, typically of the time, don't actually help you much, but this recipe came from a very comprehensive book, and I'll have to get my pronunciation right. The Kanz al-Farid Tawi al-Mawid, or something a bit like that. But basically that translates out as the treasure of useful advice of the composition of a varied table. And basically it was 830 recipes for cooking, drinking and typical medieval Arabic table manners. So it not only told you how to cook, what you're going to eat and make what you're going to drink, but it also told you how to behave when you were doing so. And this was written back in the 13th century during the Mamluk period. I think that might be just about enough. We don't want it too crushed up. So let me just get that out of the way. So that's where it came from. And at that time, Egypt, you know, was a huge dominion. Big word, dominion. It stretched all around the Red Sea, from Libya to Syria, the Gulf of Aden, or Aden, I don't know, Nubia, and as a result, it became quite a fusion. Oh, there's a nut in there. Can't afford to waste me nuts. It became a fusion of various Islamic cuisines from all those regions, and so you know this wasn't necessarily a traditional ancient Egyptian dish, more of a fusion of dishes in that area. So the actual recipe said you need meat and mint. Blanch the meat, which we've just done, brown it in a little oil, which we're going to do, and then pour its broth over it. Mix honey, pistachios, attar tip, some starch, saffron and pepper in a little vinegar. Add this mixture to the meat and cook it till it thickens. Now that's interesting because this recipe doesn't include any vinegar, even though the actual recipe did. So that's where it comes from. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to get another pan so we can start, as it says, frying off that meat. Again, like I said, that's quite typical medieval time. Boil it up first and then fry it off. Here's my pan, and what I've got here is 2 tablespoons of virgin sesame oil. Now you've got to be careful with sesame oil because most varieties that you buy will be toasted. That's an Asian type thing and it will give you a different taste altogether. This should just be straightforward, plain, virgin sesame oil. And what we're going to do is we're just going to get that up to heat, and then we're going to chuck our meat in there and we're going to fry it as such for a few minutes. Now, as I said to you, when they often said about blanching the meat, it was basically to help cleanse it, but also to balance the humours. You need a good balanced humour. So like I say, it's a common practice. Now, this dish is still cooked today, and because pistachios are quite a luxury item, often they do beef with peas, right? But we're smashing out, we're doing beef with pistachios. So, not much else to say at the moment. I'm just waiting for that to come up temperature, and then like I say, we're just going to chuck that in there, and we're just going to then fry it up for a bit. Now, even though that's had almost 2 hours boiling, I don't know what steaks you bought me, but by now that should be falling apart. So while that's sort of gently frying off a bit, this special spice mix, what was it again? a tariff tib. Now, this is one of those spice mixes again that no one really knows what it properly is. There is a 13th century cookbook, Al-Wasla ila Habib, which suggests what the list of spices might be used in a slightly different variant of this, Atarif al-Tib or Afwa al-Tib. And essentially what it seems to boil down to is about 2 teaspoons of dried rose petals that have been finely ground, a teaspoon of green cardamom seeds finely ground, a teaspoon of dried ginger finely ground, a teaspoon of black peppercorns finely ground, 1 teaspoon of long pepper finely ground, a 3/4 teaspoon of mace finely ground, 10 cloves finely ground, and then 3 bay leaves finely ground. Now, that was one suggestion. Essentially what the word means is like mixed spice. I'm just going to sprinkle that in while I'm talking. And like I say, it's one of those that we don't really know for sure what was in it. Atarif al-Tib actually means sides of scent. Okay, so meant to be a bit aromatic. It believed it actually had about 10 different spices or flavourings in it. Like we've said, pepper, long pepper, rose petals, although some argue it was rose hips, but it's not likely to be rose hips. The next thing I'm going to put in there is my saffron water. There that goes. Just going to mix that in, and then we're going to attempt to get that honey in there. So that's how much honey was it? That was 2 tablespoons of honey. Okay. So I'm just going to mix that in. Now we've got a little bit of corn flour. Okay. We've got, how much was that? A tablespoon of corn flour. Just going to, must be a bit damp in there, don't want to come out. Just going to chuck that in there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add some of that broth. Now, you don't really know how much to add, but what we want to do is obviously get that corn flour all nicely dissolved in there. And then the idea being we want that sauce to thicken up. So essentially that's it. I mean, we've still got our pistachios and we've got our mint to use, but that really is all it is. Now I might add a little bit more broth in a minute because that's already going quite thick. So that's the spice. Now the closest they believe to it today is a spice mix called Barahat, which is common throughout the Middle East. But again, every region, even every household, has their own version of Barahat. So it might have the same general sort of herbs and spices, but they're all different. So let's just cook this through. We obviously want to cook out that corn flour flavour. Okay, so now I'm going to take them crushed nuts and we're just going to chuck them in there, and then we're just going to mix that in with the beef and the sauce. And so now we're just waiting for that sauce to thicken up a bit more. In the meantime, what I've got here is some fresh mint and a beer. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to take some of them leaves and just sort of like shred them by hand, and we'll be adding these not to that, we'll be sprinkling this on top when we come to serve it. Like I say, well, I think I said, in the whole scheme of the meals, this would have actually been part of the second or third course. Normally served perhaps after the pickles or the sort of like cold meats or whatever. So, I think we'll have a little bit more meat, have a little bit more beer. Now, if you're going to have it with bread like we are, you might, if you haven't got them warm out the oven, you might want to just warm them up now. These are bread made from emmer wheat. That's E-M-M-E-R, before anybody gets excited. Okay, which, even though the Romans introduced durum or durum wheat into Egypt, Egyptians didn't want any of that. They kept with their emmer wheat, early form of wheat. You'll have to watch a completely different video and find out about that. Okay, so you could just have this as it is if you're having it as part of multiple course. We're having it with ancient Egyptian bread. Not ancient Egyptian bread as in it's an old bread. It's an old recipe. Here is our Tabahaja, our beef with pistachios. So served it up, sprinkle it with a bit of mint, and let's try it out. Meat is not quite, I mean, it's quite very tender, but the suggestion was after 2 hours of boiling, it would be practically falling apart. Not quite falling apart, but getting there. The sauce is sweet from the honey, but not over so. Try it with a bit of bread. I haven't put much sauce in here. The bread with the emmer wheat is quite nutty, and so that does tend to be a little bit overpowering. Anyway, there you go. Your Tabahaja, 13th century Egyptian beef with pistachios.